Welcome to lab. We're going to go through Jackson cross cylinder today as a method for refining your patient's cylinder portion of their refraction. And then we'll also take some time to look at the keratometers and make sure that you are comfortable doing manual keratometry. Make sure you review the Jackson cross cylinder videos before you come to lab, and please read through the relevant sections in the lab manual. We also want you to watch the keratometry lecture as well as the video on how to do keratometry, and then we will also be having a mini proficiency on keratometry, so do make sure that you get comfortable with the keratometer and how to read manual Ks. When we have patients who have been in RGP contact lenses for a long time, cataract surgeons will often require stable manual K readings from their patients before they determine the power of an IOL that they want to implant after cataract surgery. So we often do manual Ks repeatedly on these patients after they've been out of their RGPs every week or two until those readings stabilize, and at that point the surgeons feel comfortable going ahead and doing cataract surgery and having the IOLs that they implant be the appropriate power. Last week in lab, you all took a look at the Jackson cross cylinder wheel that you swing in front of the patient. In this setup, this is a position that you would have the wheel if you were checking or refining the direction of the axis for the cylinder. So you can see that the tabs that you use to flip the lens back and forth are aligned with where the axis markers are. You see the cylinder power wheel will let you know how much power you currently have in the cylinder. And if you turn it clockwise, you're going to add minus cylinder power. If you turn that wheel counterclockwise, you're going to take out cylinder power. And these generally go from 0 up to a -6. The axis indicator at the back, the arrows, as you turn those, you'll note that it rotates the entire JCC wheel, so they're connected in that way. So as you adjust the axis here to the patient's preference, you're going to be turning this wheel, and you'll see that the arrows will also align. The basic steps for JCC that you've gone through in lecture are we're first going to do a power check, and we're going to refine the axis direction, and then do a second power check. There's some circumstances where it makes sense to do axis power axis. They tend to be when your patient needs a higher amount of cylinder. Assuming during retinoscopy you find some amount of cylinder power on your patient, you're going to begin JCC with a power check. Set up your JCC lens so that it is aligned with the power. So unlike this image here where the JCC is straddling the axis, you're going to turn the JCC lens into the next click stop so that the P that you see here is actually where the A is. So you're going to rotate it so it's aligned, and then you're going to do your first power check. So for the first power check, you're going to flip that JCC lens, ask the patient if they prefer choice 1 or 2. If they prefer the option where the red dots are aligned with the axis, that indicates that they want more power. So you're going to go ahead and increase SIL by a quarter diopter step when they prefer that. Remember to maintain equivalent sphere. So for every 2 clicks or half a diopter of cylinder power that you end up adding in front of the patient, you're going to have to remove some minus, 1 click of minus, so half the amount from the spherical portion of their correction. You're going to continue to do this on your first power check, asking 1 or 2 and giving them more cylinder power if they choose the red dots, until they reverse and they're preferring the white dots. During the first power check, you are not going to take out any cylinder power. So let's say you found a half diopter of cylinder power from retinoscopy. If you do the first power check and the patient is rejecting that power, you're not going to actually take out that cylinder power. You're going to move on to checking the axis. How you're going to check the axis is go ahead and turn that JCC lens. So the JCC lens is going to have the dots straddling the axis. Wherever the red dots are when the JCC aligns with the patient preference, you're going to end up turning your axis up to 15 degrees towards the position of those red dots. On the next option you give to the patient, if the patient continues to prefer the axis to rotate in the same direction, you're going to turn it another 15 degrees. So you're going to continue turning that axis up to 15 degrees towards the red dots when the patient chooses the red dots in one direction. At some point, the patient's preference will be to have the red dots in the other direction, so you're going to reverse the direction that you're turning that axis. When you reverse the direction, you are going to rotate the axis a smaller amount. Continue using 15 degrees as long as the patient is going in the same direction. Once the patient preference reverses, I'm going to reduce my rotation, and reducing it to about 10 degrees makes sense. Now, you would continue to do that going in 10-degree steps approximately until the patient reverses direction again. That can mean on occasion you go past a position where you started, and that is fine as long as the patient hasn't had a reversal in that direction yet. When they reverse again, you're going to reduce how much you rotate the axis once again to about 5 degrees. And at that point, once the patient reverses twice, so they're going in one direction, they reverse, and then they reverse again going the other direction, you are able to narrow down or bracket, put walls around where the axis is going to be. The larger the amount of cylinder that you have in front of the patient, the more precise you're going to be on the axis. On the second power check, you will either increase or decrease the sill based on the patient's responses. So on the first power check, if you remember, if the patient chose the white dots as their preference there, you didn't actually take out the sill. Instead of taking out the sill, you went ahead and moved to your axis check. On the second power check, you're going to follow the patient's responses, whether they increase or decrease sill, and continue to do that until they reverse their choice. So if they are asking for more sill, you can continue to give them more sill. Remember to maintain the equivalent sphere as you do this, but you can continue to increase the sill as they want it. And then when they start to decrease it, go ahead and decrease the sill power in front of them. Again, remembering to maintain the equivalent sphere. Once they have decreased as much as they're going to decrease and they start to ask for sill again, go ahead and stop and leave in that lower sill power. Another difference between the first power check and the second power check is on the first power check, if you give the patient the two choices and instead of choosing red or white, they say equal, I'm going to consider that a response towards the red, so adding more sill power. For the second power check, I'm going to do the opposite because I want to leave it at the lower sill power. So if the patient responds as an equal, then I'm considering that as they're refusing the sill power or choosing the white dots, and I'm going to remove sill power for my final step. If you didn't find any cylinder during retinoscopy, there still may be some cylinder that your patient needs. In that situation, you're going to need to do a sill search. Another time when you will do a sill search is if you only found a quarter diopter sill during retinoscopy, and then you start to do your power check and the patient rejects that quarter sill, use that quarter sill and do a sill search in the same method. So with a quarter diopter sill in place, you're going to align your JCC lens for a power check, and you're going to check the power in each of the principal 4 meridians. Now, if the patient accepts the sill in any of those 4 meridians, you're going to stop that search and just start adding sill in that meridian. So say you start your power check with the axis aligned at 180, your patient chooses the red, and so they want more cylinder power in that meridian. You're going to go ahead and add more cylinder power there and continue on the steps as if that was your first power check. If the patient rejects the sill power at 180, so chooses the white, you're going to go ahead and check the other meridians. So check the 90th. If the patient rejects the power there, you're going to check the obliques as well. As soon as the patient accepts some power, you're going to continue on adding power and continue on as if that's the first power check. If the patient does not accept any sill power in any of the 4 principal meridians, then you can remove that quarter diopter sill, and that's the end of your sill search. With the JCC lens, practice doing smooth, complete lens flip Whenever you are asking the patient, if they choose one or two, go ahead and flip for the first choice. So don't just leave the lens where it is and say that that's choice one. You need to flip the lens as you're saying one, and then flip it again for choice two. You'll hear this so many times, but when refining the direction of the axis, you're going to be chasing the red dots. If that's confusing to you, if you need some help understanding what it's like visualizing it on the JCC lens itself, please have us help you in lab. That's what we're here for. We can definitely help you visualize it in lab. It's easiest to do when you have that JCC lens right in front of you. Remember that you have to do a SIL search if you didn't find any SIL during RET, but also if you only found a quarter diopter of SIL and then the patient kicks it out on your first power check. You're going to proceed with a SIL search with that quarter diopter of SIL in place. When working on the autorefractors, you're going to make sure you go into JCC mode first and then put that quarter diopter of SIL power in order to do the SIL search. That's when you didn't find any SIL in RET. If you don't do this, then the automated phoropters will be off in their maintenance of your equivalent sphere. So if you want those automated phoropters to go ahead and maintain your equivalent sphere for you, which is a great feature that they have, then you want to go ahead and put it into JCC mode first and then put in your quarter diopter SIL. If you're doing JCC and your patient is having trouble telling which option is better, if they both look bad, then you want to make sure that you have your right preset lens. We talked about from the bichrome having that first green in place, so being a little bit over minus. And if your SIL from RET is really off, that might cause some problems. Hopefully you can adjust how you're asking the patient and how much power you have in there in your axis so that they can at least make a choice as to which option looks the least bad. Especially as you're refining the direction of the axis, they can both look pretty bad to the patient. Make sure you use a target that's at least 2 lines above their best visual acuity. I like to use the 20/40 line in general unless the patient's potential acuity is reduced. So if the patient is not able to read 20/20 or better, then you may have to increase the size of the target line. One problem that we encounter is if your spherical is under minus, then the patient may take a lot more cylinder than you expect. And this is because the spherical equivalent is going to be more minus. So they may actually have a lot more cylinder than you found in RET, but your preset and your setup may actually not be correct. Another thing that happens is people often find that their patients run them all over the place. Have us watch you when you're doing JCC so that we can see if there's a problem with how you're bracketing, if there's a problem with your setup so that their accommodation is fluctuating, if something's up with your JCC lens. Basically, we're going to help you by watching how you're doing it and assessing your setup to see if there's a problem with that. So if you're having that problem, just call one of us over and we will take a look at your setup and how you're doing the test. So just a quick summary. You're going to start with your endpoint of the bichrome or the MSBVA that we did last week. You're going to do a first power check where you leave in the higher power, where you don't remove any of the SIL power that you found in retinoscopy. You're going to refine the axis by following the patient's responses towards the red. And every time the patient reverses direction, you're going to reduce the number of degrees that you're turning the axis. In general, we start with 15. And as the patient reverses direction, you're going to reduce that to 10. When the patient reverses direction again, you'll reduce that even smaller. For the second power check, you are going to either increase or decrease the amount of cylinder power in front of your patient based on their responses, and at the end you will leave in the lower power option. You're going to do a SIL search if there's no cylinder present in your retinoscopy findings, or if the patient rejects a quarter diopter of SIL power that you found in retinoscopy. In both those cases, you're going to do a SIL search. And remember to maintain the equivalent sphere value when you're adding and removing cylinder power in front of your patient. For your assignments next week, you are going to do keratometry on all your patients. So for the keratometry recording, you'll go to the eye exam. The additional tab will have a section to record keratometry. K1 is going to be your flatter K or your lower number, and K2 will be your steeper K or your larger number. Make sure you record that in there, and then per usual, you're going to record your retinoscopy under your manifest. You're going to record your 20/40 blurs as a note. You have to record your net values for the 20/40 blur. You may also record the gross values for your own calculations. That can be helpful. In the final RX box now, you're going to have a spherical refinement. So make sure under type that you record whether you did bichrome or MSBVA. And then you're going to have a cylinder refinement. So make sure you record JCC so that we know you have refined your sphere and your cylinder. And that's what you'll enter in the type. For your Lab 3 assignment, you are going to do keratometry, retinoscopy, 20/40 blur, a spherical refinement, and then JCC. For the TopCon and the Marco, they both have two different ways to do JCC. They have one method that really imitates what you're doing on the manual phoropter, and then they have a special proprietary split screen JCC available. So I want you to go ahead and try out both those methods of doing JCC on each of the automated phoropters. I will not have you use the third option on the TopCon, which is a smart JCC. We can talk about that in lab, but I'm not going to have you guys use that. Thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in lab.